Welcome everybody to our Southall seminar, and today we're very lucky to have two comrades who are just back, literally this week, a few days ago, back from just over a week in Venezuela, where they were attending the 9th International Conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. And also while they were there, they visited several communes and learnt more about the new Comuna Constitution that's being launched in Venezuela, which is another very significant shift in the balance of class forces in Venezuela, a shift away from capitalism towards socialism, towards popular, really representative power in the country. So it's a huge shift. I'm not going to talk anymore because I will steal all the thunder of the speakers. Hopefully at the end of the meeting I'll be left with nothing to say. So I'm going to hand over first to Daniel, Comrade Daniel O'Brien, who will tell you a bit more.
Thank you, comrades. Firstly, a little bit about our trip to Venezuela. It was organised by the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. It was facilitated by the PSUV and the Foreign Ministry of Venezuela. So we're very grateful to all of them for hosting us and helping us see some of the country, as well as all the productive discussions and talks we had with comrades and members of the Venezuelan public, members of the communes, all of the people in Venezuela that are working for national liberation and socialism within the country. Regarding the trip, it was very interesting. As I said, we had some of our own meetings with the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, a couple of days of talks and discussions, primarily the launch of the women's platform, which is about the advancing the rights of women globally. There are still a lot of issues facing women, especially in the developed world, but still in the imperialist world today, that the women's platform seeks to address. We had a conference on the communes, titled under the slogan, Commune or Nothing, which is a slogan issued by Hugo Chavez just before his death, and has recently become a vibrant motto of the process of revolution within Venezuela. And we had a very important meeting on anti-fascism and anti-imperialism, discussions on how those two are linked, and today are inseparable fights, inseparable struggles, how imperialism is using fascism in order to advance its goals worldwide, and how the path is being paved for fascism within the imperialist countries as our own working classes begin to suffer more and more, begin to become more and more discontent with how their affairs are being managed by the bourgeoisie. And there are many reasons for that, which we'll go into a little bit later. But we also had the opportunity to visit many communes, which Ellie will discuss a little bit later, and to hear from, as I said, leaders of those communes, leading figures within them, who are also well versed in Marxism and the class struggle. So it was an incredible experience to see that, and really the life and livelihood of the Venezuelan people, the optimism. I remember thinking halfway through the trip, what freedom these people have, despite the US sanctions, despite all of the issues in the country, the political freedom of the working class in Venezuela to express themselves, the hope of building a better life, the possibilities of building a better life. They're all real, tangible things that are actually happening in the country. And it's a huge contrast to how we experience life in Britain, which, as we were talking in our meeting earlier, is depressing. It's depressing for British workers because we don't feel like we have hope. We don't feel like we have a future. We feel like if we work really hard, we won't get anywhere at best. Because, especially for my generation and other people, my age and younger, life is getting worse for us. The material conditions are getting worse from us. As the super profits from imperialism that Britain and America and these other imperialist countries are less able to exploit the rest of the world, and the fact that they've smashed the organising working class in our countries, the less bribes they pay to us, essentially. So the poorer conditions we live in, the poorer wages we receive, and the less hope for a brighter future we have. And you can really see the polar opposite in Venezuela, where the people are striving for a better future, the people are achieving a better future. I wanted to begin with a brief overview of the Bolivarian Revolution. It really is brief. It's a process that's older than 26 years, but Hugo Chavez became president in 1999, so we can mark that as the start. But really, to understand the history of it, you have to go back a bit further and a bit more in depth. So just a brief overview to give a bit of context to our visit, our talks, and the whole concept of the revolution in Venezuela and what's happening there. So going back to the 80s, the Venezuelan president Carlos Perez signed a deal with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the imperialist economic weapon of choice, essentially. And this deal with the IMF, which was normally to get rid of whatever debts the country may have, etc. But the effect of that was essentially a neoliberal deal with prices soaring and social spending cut. For example, the price of bread rose 600%. Obviously, this led to a massive uprising from the poorer communities, especially around the cities, people that had come in from the farms, the countryside, looking for work, who were most affected by these cuts, most precarious people. And they began protesting, which turned into riots, which turned into looting, firstly of food. This was primarily a protest against neoliberalism, against social welfare spending, against poverty and hunger. And that began on February the 27th, 1989. And the military was ordered to suppress these riots, suppress this looting, which led to an official death toll of a couple of hundred, but more likely a few thousand people being killed by the Venezuelan military. And in response to this, a few years later, Chavez, then in the military, attempts a coup in 1992 with a small section of the military, about 2,500 military officers, corporals, a big range of ranks, but a small contingent attempt to overthrow the president because of these neoliberal reforms, how they're treating the ordinary Venezuelans, how they've signed off their national sovereignty away to the IMF, away to imperialism. And they chose to use Simon Bolivar, the symbol of national independence and resistance, who led the campaign for liberation for the South American nations in North South America, led the campaign against the Spanish Empire and the Europeans for the national independence of these South American, these Latin American countries. Chavez was released from prison a couple of years later. He was pardoned by the next president, released a couple of years later. Throughout this time, he'd been studying socialism, he'd been studying political science, both at university and in his jail cell, and later founded the Movement for the Fifth Republic. So a new republic. One of their first acts in 1999, after he becomes president, is constitutional reform, where they nationalise key industries. They make food a right. Food becomes a right for the people, no longer a luxury that, it's... And it really is one of the key things throughout the story of the Bolivarian Revolution is food, and we'll be discussing that a bit more. But that constitutional reform also enables the creation of communal councils. It implements the Bolivarian missions to help provide access to people for food, housing, healthcare, and education, all things that have been denied to the masses of Venezuelan workers. And a brief little bit about the makeup of Venezuela. Essentially, from the 1900s onwards, it became quite an industrialized country, one of the most industrialized in Latin America because of the presence of large amounts of oil. And what this led to was a large section of industrialised workers based around the oil industry, but at the expense of everything else, including agriculture. Agriculture dropped massively, and by 1999 or by the 90s, about 70 or 80% of food was imported to Venezuela. So essentially the bourgeoisie within Venezuela and the imperialists working with them were looking for the highest return on profits. And so there wasn't any interest in national food security. There wasn't any interest in feeding the Venezuelan people. There was interest in profits from oil. And so really, throughout the 20th century, the Venezuelan economy has been focused on oil. And that's the situation that Chavez and the Movement for the Fifth Republic and then the PSUV have inherited, where you have a small industrialised portion of society based around the oil industry, very limited low agriculture within the country, and quite limited industrial capacity in other industries throughout the country as well. So the reforms that come from that constitutional reform in 1990 relied on the oil profits because essentially there was nothing else in Venezuela. But these were also top-down reforms. It was a successful election of a socialist to a bourgeois state, and they were trying to make these reforms. Not only did they have opposition and competition, and still do, from sections of the Venezuelan state who are against socialism, who are against the progress towards helping the ordinary workers of Venezuela. It was obviously popular amongst the people, but it wasn't a mass demand that came from the workers, although it was enabled by that. It was not the people organising themselves to organise these things, to achieve these things. It was the government using oil profits and using a lot of money from these oil profits to try and stimulate certain progressive growth areas, and also helping people with foods and access to education and things. So essentially trying to buy all these things rather than engage the Venezuelan working class. Although they were trying, but there was no mass movement for the workers to actually engage with this process, to actually engage with changing the productive forces within the country and the relations within the country. So the PSUV was formed in 2007, which then brought together a wide range of people from different political affiliations, including Chavez's Movement for the Fifth Republic, but also communists, social democrats, former guerrilla fighters, all kinds of a vast, a real mass party, which ranges really from nationalists and social democrats to communists on the other side. So it has been from the start, there's been a focus on economic diversification, but this has also been marked by resistance and competition from the bourgeoisie within Venezuela, as well as the imperialists outside of it, who have been using economic sabotage, literal sabotage, to try and disrupt any movement towards essentially a sovereign Venezuela that's able to produce not only its food, but all the things it needs to function and run as an effective country. So Venezuela still has very little, if not no heavy industry outside of the oil industry. But land reform has distributed large land holdings to over 200,000 families, which is half the rural population, who have access to tools, resources, training and technical assistance from the government. Fishermen had similar assistance, and a ban on destructive bottom trawling benefited them as well, because it was not destroying the habitats of the fish they were trying to catch, but rather maintaining that source of food. And farmers and fishermen also benefited from a state pension, a debt relief programme, and got access to a state pension, which they'd never had before. And food began to be distributed at controlled prices through state-run markets, through the Venezuelan Food Produce and Distributor, PDVAL, and the food market Mercal networks. Free meals for school children, sick, elderly, pregnant people were arranged through these social missions as well. But the collapse of oil prices brought hardship and shortages in around 2010, 2011, which was then compounded by economic sanctions. But they'd still managed to eliminate half the problems with hunger in the country by 2015, despite these shortages, despite these issues. Then the 2017 sanctions, as well as the renewed counter-revolutionary struggle within the country, also further exacerbated these issues, and that's when the CLAP, the local committees for supply and production, were set up to alleviate these issues with food supply and production. And still, again, the move towards arranging things around the communes, especially food production, and taking food production out as a mission to the people rather than large farms was a focus, and they achieved alleviating the worst effects of that shock, of that crisis, and are now something like 95-98% food sovereign. So 95-98% of food is grown within Venezuela. Then obviously in that period as well, we had the struggles within the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. So I think I'll leave it there, and we'll move on to Ellie, who's going to talk on a little bit about the communes.
Hello, everybody. So there will be a few repetitions, but mostly I'm going to focus on the commune, as Dan said. So the process of the commune started really in 2006, when Chavez announced that the Bolivarian Revolution was a socialist revolution, and he launched the project of communal council. Progressively, those communal council were to evolve into communes and form the communal state. In 2009, it became constitutional, so it became officially the path and destination for building socialism in Venezuela, with the law of commune being voted in the assembly. So what are the communes? The communes are grassroots organizations that are designed to decentralize power, transfer it from the state to the people, and create a socialist economy at a very local level. They were conceived as political and economic entities with a focus on self-governance, local production, and community-based decision-making, with the ultimate goal of replacing the traditional state, really. Today, they are the commune are the most successful example of participatory democracy in Venezuela. More than 5,000 communes are registered in the country. They continue to develop alongside the capitalist system, though, and that can create some tension and problem. But they're still managing to give them power, and the state is really behind them in encouraging their growth. So due to that dual power, the commune were not very successful and popular in the early days, and because they lack means and funding, and also due to the relatively good standard of living provided by the oil revenue before the sanction. People didn't feel the need to organize communally because they had subvention from the state. So it wasn't a real desire from the people. It was just Chavez insisting on building it. But until his death, he kept insisting on the necessity of building the commune, and he saw them as the ultimate form of governance and socialism. So in 2012, on his weekly televised address to the country, he insisted again on the vital importance of a commune, calling them heroic construction carried out by the masses, and the place where socialism will be born. So he launched then his now famous Comuna o Nada, which translates to commune or nothing. So that's really the rally cry, or the cry rally of the commune. They shout it all the time, basically. Exactly. Soon after that, it died, and Nicolás Maduro was elected as his successor. And as Dan said, the country was instantly faced with severe economic crises, imperialist assault, and various coup attempts. So the government then adopted a shock therapy policy that kind of further deepened the crisis. But and there were a lot of basic necessities that were missing. We assisted at a lot of conferences and talks from the Venezuelan people, and they were saying how really bad it was, and how children didn't have access to diapers, women didn't have access to sanitary pads, how medication was lacking, and it was those kind of things. So they're still very traumatized by that era. So to start alleviating that, the people starting spontaneously actually organizing into communes. They start to remember what Chavez said about them, and how there could be a place where, by coming together, they could produce things for their own necessities. So it started first in the countryside because food was missing, and they're starting in the rural El Mazo commune, which means the maize. They began to seize land in the state of Lara, and step by step, the communal fever kind of spread all over the country, and they became able to kind of overcome slowly the sanction and create an economy of self-reliance, really. During our trip, we went to visit we went to 3 communes, and we visited 2 of them in depth. One was the El Panal commune. If you know about Venezuela, you might have heard of it. It's one of the flagship and most known commune of the country. It means behave. It's located in the area of Caracas, and as I said, it's one of the most successful communes of the country. It was established by the Alexis Vive Patriotic Force, which is a grassroots collective with deep roots in the community. It's also one of the first to declare itself as a commune, even before the legal framework was in place. So before 2009, they started to organize locally. The members of El Panal are very militant and strongly anti-imperialist. So we went there, and they all had a T-shirt with a national liberation struggle leader picture on the T-shirt, and they had huge murals with a lot of the leaders of the Palestine resistance movement, a lot of Venezuelan, Latin American leaders, and African leaders as well were represented. So it was a really good place of display of anti-imperialism sentiment. Really, and solidarity, especially toward the Palestinian people. So one interesting fact when we went is that they're all on the houses. There is the title of there is a plaque with the job title of the person who live there written on the plaque. So it says, here lives a nurse, here lives a hairdresser, here lives a shopkeeper, and things like that. So people know who they are according to their job, and they know where to go when they need help. So that was very interesting. So we visited one of the communal council inside of the commune. So communes are made of different communal council, and communal council are like small assemblies where people come from families, like a group of family living close to each other, coming together and deciding on things. And so we went to one of that, and so yeah, they explained to us that thanks to their collective effort, they managed actually to completely eradicate drug from the communities. So drug was a problem there, and they managed to completely eradicate it. And drug today, contrary to what the United States is saying, is not a problem in Venezuela. They have successfully eradicated the problem at a community level and also at a state level. So. And so that after that, they took us around to show us different production units, like a meat plant that they have, and also a fabric factory where they make clothing for the communities. They also show us their cultural centers where they gather to have plays and songs and things like that, and also a robotic center where they assemble robotics, I guess. They also operate a sugar packing plant, so we didn't see everything because they're really huge, actually, communes. So they have different areas, and we had a limited amount of time to visit them. But they also have, as I was saying, sugar packaging plants. They have bakeries, farming initiative. So they grow fish and pork. And so the aim of El Panel, like all functioning communes in the country, is to become fully self-sufficient. And they also work very closely with other communes around the country and try to organize a fair price to circumvent the capitalist market, which is a bit hostile to them, obviously. And so they're trying to work between communes and have a fair price food market that connects directly with the rural commune, because there are a city commune, urban commune. So they're bypassing capitalist intermediaries to provide affordable produce to 1,800 families or more. And so that was one of the communes we visited. Then we went to Valencia, which which is the third biggest city of the country and has some major industrial centers that include vehicle assembly, metalworking, food production, chemicals, pharmaceutical, and textile. So it was a really huge city. We met there with very militant trade unionists and also guerrilla fighters that participate in one uprising in the 80s. So the trade unionists there have been organizing industrial workers in the area, so they kind of show us around. They took us to two different plants, industrial plants, sorry. Many industrial plants are still owned by private and foreign companies. So it's really important for them to unionize to fight against those capitalists. And so we went to Firestone, an American manufacturer of tires, and Ford, which is an American manufacturer of cars. In 2018, the Ford plant drastically reduced its activity in the area and offered buyouts to the employees. It went to assemble 300 cars a year and having, I think, 900 workers to almost nothing nowadays. So basically, they just work on imported cars and things like that. Nothing much is happening, and I think there's still 120 workers remaining. And they were explaining that if you unionize, the boss can sideline you and give promotion and bonuses to people that are not unionized, which is very unfair. And when they have by law, they have the workers have the possibility of denouncing those practices to the government, and then the government kind of take the decision that the boss has to pay the unionized worker and give them also a bonus, but then the boss can make appeal. So it's like a circle that never ends, and they really didn't explain how that's managed to work out in favor of the workers, but that's the law is in favor of the worker and the bosses at the same time. After that meeting, we had a very convivial moment with the members of the commune, where we had the chance to taste the local food that they grow. So they're very proud. They made a stew with very nice goat meat, yuca, which is, I think, known as cassava, and also maize.
Pumpkin? Cool.
Pumpkin. Okay, yeah, pumpkin, that's true. Pumpkin, and things that they grow locally. So they're really happy to show you around, show you their pork, show you their chicken, the fish, all the things. They've really put a big emphasis on food security and sufficiencies because of the trouble that they've been through in 2014 and 15. So they're really trying to be food sufficient. Overall, the socialist process in Venezuela is going strong. There is a clear involvement of every member of society in the process, and no one is left behind. Or we didn't see. Normally, when you go to this part of the world, there is always a lot of informal businesses in the street, and there is not much in Venezuela. There is, but it's very few. It's one coffee seller here, one coffee seller there, especially in Caracas. So it was the capital was very clean. The roads were very clean. Everything looks very decent, and people are very well kept, really. So they feel a very great sense of pride and patriotism, and they're very passionate about the defense of the motherland. They're ready to fight. All of them was like, "Oh, my kid is 16 and he's already in the militia. He's in the militia, ready to fight against the imperialist aggression." So yeah, we had a chance by being there to see that the commune contribute greatly to that. They increase the well-being and politicization of the population. So a lot of commune have schools, so they do their own education. They don't send their kids to the public school, or that might be bourgeois, I guess, I don't know. And they also have Marxist-Leninist studies group that serve as a tool of radicalization. So a lot of them were of the leaders. On El Panal, the leader was quoting Lenin, and when we went to the trade union one in Valencia, they had a picture of the Great Four, which we have on our wall as well, which is Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. So it was very encouraging to see that. They had small reading kits that they distribute to us, and we brought some here. If you read Spanish, you can learn a bit more. So they produce the work of Lenin. They're really educating themselves at a grassroots level and with their own means. So yeah. Yeah.
Before I hand over to Dan, I just would like to supplement Ellie's stories from communes with a short anecdote of my own, because I have also visited a few communes in and around Caracas. One of the ones I went to, I was visiting specifically a local council, which is, as Ellie said, the commune is actually the second tier of popular power, and below that, in the commune's made up of smaller councils. And a council, as she said, will be, just a few hundred people, a local community, a group of families who live right next to each other. And each one of those meets together regularly, and they have areas of life. And I've seen this in the council. They have it on the wall where they live in their local community hall, and everyone's got a local little community centre that they meet in, however small and basic. It's there, it's in the middle of the community, it's where they have their meetings, and on the wall is their plan. And they've made it. And there are like 5 or 6 areas of life. So it's, water, sanitation, whatever it will be, I can't remember, healthcare, transportation, education, blah, there's a bunch of these. And they will have had a meeting where they decide, at this moment in time, what's our number one priority to solve in this area of life. And they'll write it down, they'll agree what it is. Then they'll put someone in charge of overseeing a plan. And they'll decide what the plan is. What do they need to solve this problem? Can they do it themselves, or do they need help from the state? If they need help from the state, they'll tell the state, this is what we need, can you give it to us? And if the state can, it does. They feel like the state's on their side, basically. If the state can help them, it does. Sometimes it can't help them. If it's like certain type of building materials, they might not have it. But in which case, then they're looking for solutions, how to work around it. But the fundamental thing is empowerment. And what I really found from being in these communities was the sense of optimism and agency that gives to people, because the state is telling them, identify your problems, get together, do anything you can to solve them, we'll help you wherever we can, tell us what you need, we'll try and help you, work out what your priorities are. You decide, you tell us what needs fixing, and we'll try and help you, but also you're empowered, right? You are the people, the state is for you. No one's going to come along and say it's not your business. It's absolutely your business, and it's a completely different way of living. And there's something very important, the impact that has on people, I think, is quite profound, because they don't have lots and lots of consumer goods, but they have a whole lot of energy and optimism. They have their children young, not because, they've got nothing else to do, but because it's a good idea to have your children when you're young. And the children grow up in this atmosphere of agency, of being listened to, of seeing the plan on the wall and getting old enough to participate in the plan, of listening to meetings where, as Ellie said, popular anti-imperialist slogans are part of daily life. And if you're in a meeting, a local council meeting or a town meeting, and they're talking about politics or the threat to the country, or even the development of the communes, someone will start chanting a slogan, and everybody will join in, and it will lead to a song and a dance and some more slogans, and the kids are all involved and the grannies are all involved. This is a really grassroots mobilisation, and it's such a different thing from anything we've experienced over here. So I just wanted to add that in from my own experience, that this is definitely what's happening. This is the shift that's taking place. And that's why the people are so mobilized in defense of Venezuela. That's why if the imperialists were so crazy as to try to invade, they would absolutely be lifting up a rock to drop it on their own feet. The people are more than prepared to stand up for everything. And I think, just before I pass over to Dan, this issue of food security is massive, because, as you see, the whole point of the sanctions regime was to strangle the people, was to push them into starvation and suffering to the level that they would bring down their own government, even though it's their government. That was the aim of the sanctions. And they knew that was the aim, but they were very vulnerable, because if you're importing 80% of your food and a blockade is set up against you, you can very quickly start to suffer, and they were suffering. But the fact that the government, instead of backing down, did everything possible to solve the problem and to enable the people to mobilise to solve the problem has been hugely important. The rationing system that meant that despite all the inflation, despite incredible inflation, everybody had still, so we should just remind people who don't know maybe, that in the housing missions that Dan talked about, the social housing that's been set up, it's free. You don't own it, but you don't have to pay rent. And you also, even more, you don't pay bills. Your water, your electricity, are part of the house. Amazing. They're just provided. So, inflation, and there's a rationing program called CLAP, which provides basic necessities. It's not luxury. You're not going to love it. You're going to get really pissed off with beans and rice and, pasta and bloody hell. Right, okay, fine. But it keeps you alive. The government did not let the people starve. And yes, salaries, because of inflation, because of the blockade and because of the inflation that caused, salaries ended up being able to buy very, very little. But the salary ended up being like a top-up mechanism to give you some eggs and some cheese and occasionally a bit of meat, right? I mean, it's not luxuries, is it? And your mobile phone bill. But that's what your salary is paying for. Other stuff is guaranteed. People are not on the street starving. They're not robbing each other. They're not desperate. Despite everything the imperialists have been doing to them, the strangulation policy did not work. And through this period of strangulation, they've gone from importing 80% of their food to being 95% food sufficient. And they don't tell you that, do they? What's the stories we hear in the media? that Nicolas Maduro and his government are corrupt, that they're the ones taking all the money, that they're leaving their people hungry, that they are economically incompetent, that it's their incompetence that's led to problems of food. Right? The sanctions don't exist. Sanctions, are never talked about in our media, and what effect they have, and what effect they're meant to have. This strangulation policy, imperialism is a genocidal enterprise, right? From top to bottom, start to finish. Let the people die if it means we get back our oil. That's the equation of the imperialists. And the masses know what this process has given them. They know it's kept them alive and empowered, and that they are building towards genuine sovereignty and freedom and liberation. And they're doing it from their own efforts. And that is why when the government calls out for people to join the militia, they're queuing out the doors.
Not because they're not good traficants.
Not because of that.
Well, I'll come to those silly claims in a minute. But I just wanted to put some numbers on that. So they're reporting 49,000 communal councils in Venezuela, and at the start of this year there were 3,600 communes within Venezuela, which, as mentioned, are made up of collections of communal councils joining together. The El Penal commune we visited had 100,000 members, for example, in Caracas, spread out across different neighbourhoods, different workplaces, and they were able to decide amongst themselves what productive facilities they were going to produce within the commune. And as part of this decision of what projects they want to implement to improve the communes, each commune, there was one in February this year, a communal consultation. Every commune can submit a project to the government, and it receives whatever's been collectively decided. They receive $10,000 from the government to help build that project. But there are still, a lot of issues with this process within the framework of a bourgeois state that is slowly, being beaten into submission, ministry by ministry, law by law, by the PSUV and the lawmakers and the people of Venezuela. It's still a bourgeois state, and there's still capitalism within Venezuela. So they've had issues with the reactionary workers in ministries, even entire ministries. They've had to struggle against their own ministries, even the Ministry of Communes. When they first implemented the cooperatives and the communes in the early 2000s, they had issues with them and essentially had to start from scratch, where cooperatives the successful ones started acting like just regular businesses, and instead of bringing workers on to contribute as equals to the entire project, they started hiring other workers as wage labourers to increase the value and wealth of the cooperatives. So they've been through a long process of discovery and transformation of all these projects and all the issues. And one of the biggest hindrances has been the remaining of capitalism and corruption within the state, the corruption that's engendered by capitalism, that's engendered by capitalists seeking to make a profit, seeking to further themselves rather than the project. So they've been struggling against that for a long time. And it's interesting to see the local units, the local organisations of the PSUV, for example, that they have within communes, within the missions, how they're organised, as Joti said, around those. Again, the communes organise around different concerns, and then there's other local projects that organise around different areas. So, for example, with the PSUV grassroots organisations, they're organised around elections, they're organised around women, youth, workers, social missions, and the militias, all these different areas to organise and mobilise the people on a political basis as well as the practical basis of the communes for what people need. We also had a visit with some architects who were trying to, and that's another huge thing, is not just the villages, the homes, like Joti was saying, people having affordable, low-cost or free housing with bills taken care of, but also in the rural communities or in the very poorer areas in the outskirts of town. These are shanty towns, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of common throughout, particularly South America. You think of Brazil, you can think of the favelas, very similar on the outskirts of town, just ad hoc communities built up with no formal planning, no rhyme or reason, very little facilities, and with whatever materials they can find and use. We didn't see any dangerous looking areas. We didn't see any dangerous looking housing. We certainly saw places that were, you couldn't drive a car through, and it was a steep walk up a hill to get to your home, and it was a very cramped home perched on a hill. But what they've been enabling people to do is to improve their own homes on a massive scale. But one of the issues they ran into, these architects were working with the local community to design houses that would work for this community, for these people. They got all these plans together and said, what do you need? What can we do in this space? Working together. And they came up with these designs, these plans, and they sent it off to a factory to build these houses, the prefabricated structures, etc. And the factory came back to them and said, well, we started, but we've run out of capital. We can't get the materials. We're not going to be able to build these houses. And so they instead pivoted to supplying the workers themselves, these people in these communities themselves, with the materials, different materials, slightly different designs, to help them build these houses themselves. Obviously, that's not an ideal situation. An ideal situation would be a nationalised housing factory that was able to produce homes for these people. But within the context they're working in, within their limitations, they are finding many, many creative solutions to all of the issues, again, caused by this slow motion revolution within the framework of a bourgeois state, within a capitalist market still. And the sanctions, which we're going to discuss, which are causing real problems and confusion. We didn't see any shortages, but you can see for us as international visitors, the confusion. So we didn't go over there with any money because we couldn't find anywhere to exchange for bolivars, which is the official currency of Venezuela. But we never saw any bolivars when we were over there. It seems most people are using card transactions. Things are transacted in bolivars with the national bank, etc. But cash transactions are usually done in dollars and other things. It becomes a little bit confusing and a little bit funny when you're trying to break down a dollar and they don't use the coins. So you use 50 euro cents or whatever someone else has to pay the remaining amount. So there's real effects of the sanctions, which include getting materials in and out. So after one wave of sanctions, there was they were unable to get any materials, any of the parts, to repair the tools and the other machinery needed for the oil industry, like the critical industry in Venezuela. It's a very deliberate targeting of Venezuela's economy. But they were able to manufacture the parts themselves, produce tools themselves, repair items themselves, or build replacement parts themselves to keep the oil production going. And it's that kind of... And it's that kind of ingenuity and determination that has kept the revolution going, that has stopped people from starving, that has stopped Venezuela from grinding to a halt. I'll just go over a brief timeline of the imperialist and the internal comprador aggression against Venezuela since the election of Chavez. So after Chavez's election in 1999, there was an attempted coup in 2002. And that was actually the Alexis Vive patriotic force that Eleonore mentioned was named after a young man from El Panal, or the area, the neighbourhood, 23 de Janeiro neighbourhood, which is a very poor and combative neighbourhood affected by the Caracazo, the rioting and the suppression of those riots. And he was a young man killed who just went along to the Miraflores palace to demand the return of Chavez, to protect Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution, and ended up being shot for it by the people waging the coup. But that coup was quite clearly organised with the support of the United States, with the knowledge and support of the United States. And it was from then that Chavez and the other revolutionaries took a much more spoke a lot more about anti-imperialism, the necessity of facing up to imperialism. In 2002 to 3, you had the oil lockout, a bourgeois influenced event to try and strangle Venezuela's economy. And during that time, the 2000s as well, looking back on it, Chavez thanked the Iraqi resistance from taking US attention off of Venezuela so that they could try and progress with their revolution. 2015 saw increasing US sanctions. It's really the start of the big wave of really crushing, suffocating sanctions, starting with oil and finance, and then in 2017 a much broader range of sanctions across everything else. And that's coinciding with internal comprador counter-revolutionary action, very much sponsored by the US, where they're recognising Juan Guaido, who was he was only the president of the National Assembly, which was elected. It was another section of the executive legislature. He was elected Speaker of the National Assembly, and then they were claiming that Maduro was not president, so Juan Guaido was president. It's a bit like naming the Speaker of the House of Commons, whoever it is at the moment. Nobody cares about them, do they?
They might as well.
Prime Minister.
As Prime Minister. Obviously this was farcical and didn't really reflect anything on the ground, except there was, increased protests against US sanctions, the effects of the US and imperialist sanctions, essentially, which were causing such huge problems within Venezuela. As mentioned, they're still struggling to transform their economy. Despite achieving food security, there's other areas of the economy that still need a lot of work, and that's what they're getting on with at the moment. But at that time, it was very dire. And there was also economic sabotage from national and international bourgeoisie, deciding to close down factories, just saying, well, it's too much bother for us. And essentially, this is just another way of stifling their revolutionary process by withdrawing their capital from the country, by firing people, by saying, and it was factories making nappies, sanitary products, towels, other things like that people need in their daily life. It was these factories producing basics that they were shutting down, and but the government were nationalising those at the time as well. So there was a strong struggle going on against that wave of economic sabotage. And lots more things going on with military incursions along the border with Colombia, a lot of military aggression there from a hostile Colombian government. In 2018, the British government, the UK government, refuses to release Venezuela's $1.9 billion worth of gold from the Bank of England, and Juan Guaido actually suing the Bank of England to release the gold to him using funds that the Venezuelan funds that the US seized. So the US seized Venezuela's money in America because they have the only oil refinery in Texas that can properly process the super heavy crude that comes out of Venezuela. And even though Juan Guaido is long gone, they're still embroiled in a legal battle to decide who owns the gold, because our imperialists are determined that the Venezuelans can't have it. So by 2019, they're reaching the peak of sanctions, the most pressure they can put on Venezuela using sanctions. And really this is the period 2017 to 2016 where they start thinking about the communes, thinking about other attacks, deepening and furthering the revolution. And that's principally why they're so scared of Venezuela, because the response to every piece of pressure, every attempted counter-revolution has been for the Venezuelans to deepen and further the revolution. And as we pointed out, the arming of the communes, which millions of people have turned up to sign up to the militias, only furthers this evidence. And it's nothing to do with the equipment that Venezuela has. It's nothing to do with the military material that Venezuela has at the moment. The Venezuelan revolution depends on the determination of the Venezuelan people. And that's the only measure by which they will have success or failure. So I'm sure everyone's been keeping up with the news quite recently. We were watching it with some interest while in Caracas, seeing what was happening. With obviously the US has recently started ramping up the pressure. They've been blowing up small boats off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia, which has also led Petro. He was until recently not actually a friend of Venezuela or Maduro, but the US has started accusing Petro as well in Colombia of being a drug lord and a drug smuggler and targeting Colombia. So through that pressure, they're actually driving Colombia and actually many other Caribbean and Latin American nations closer together in the efforts of peace and solidarity against US imperialism. They've also said that they're authorizing CIA operations within Venezuela, and just a couple of days ago, Trump said that they would authorize strikes on military targets within Venezuela. Although I think he's walked that back. But concerning as well, they did have the USS Gravely, a US battleship that was hosting some Marines as well, but was also involved in the destruction of these small boats as well, of which there is absolutely no evidence that they were smuggling drugs. The whole drug story has been kind of kept on the back burner for a long time. They never really brought it up until recently. But it's been a long simmering story they've had in the background for ages that, it's drugs, it's a narco state. But, that didn't seem to concern them so much 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Now it's become a major concern. But of course, as we know, this is all propaganda, imperialist propaganda. And you can refer to many international organizations that monitor drugs and drug production. Venezuela counts for less than 5% of specifically like cocaine flow through Latin America. Obviously, it's not nothing. There is a small amount of drugs traffic that goes through Venezuela, but it's a big country. There's a lot of coastline, and there's a lot of work to be done to try and shut everything down. I mean, if the US really wanted, wouldn't they close all their borders to drugs? So it's a ridiculous thing to ask that Venezuela shuts down its tiny minority of criminals in the country that surely still exist and transit some drugs. But we saw there on the streets, the people in the communes do not want drugs in their communities, and the communes have been one of the primary forces in driving out narcotics, and that was primarily to keep the Venezuelan people down, to keep the Venezuelan people confused and disorientated and demotivated by a horrible culture of drugs and violence which they've eradicated from most of their neighbours, most of their streets. There's an organisation called WACO which reported in 2018 that 210 metric tons of cocaine passed through Venezuela. That was in 2018. They have made a lot of efforts since then to reduce that flow, and it has been reducing significantly. But that's compared to 1,400 tons that went through Guatemala in the same year, 6 times as much. And the nonsense that Maduro's the leader of a cartel called Tren de Aragua, which were based in a prison in Aragua state that had fallen into the hands of criminals essentially, and which was actually cleared out by the military some years ago. But also Diosdado Cabello, who is the deputy leader of the PSUV, the Ministry of Interior, likely to be the successor of Maduro if he were to step down or be killed. They're claiming that he's a member of another cartel. So 2 of the most senior figures in the PSUV and the Venezuelan governments are members of rival cartels. I mean, it's, you've got to keep your story straight if you're going to be making stuff up like this. It's very silly. But it's also very dangerous because it's a very emotive thing. It's a very easy thing for, especially in imperialist countries. Drugs have been racking the US. Drugs have been destroying the US. I doubt they want to stop cocaine. It's the favoured drug of the ruling class, of bankers and media stars.
And the US Army.
And the US Army is, as you say, very much implicated in the trade and transfer of drugs. There are many stories about US Special Forces not only becoming addicted to drugs, but smuggling large amounts of drugs. And the US in Afghanistan oversaw the reintroduction of the opium growing and opium trade in Afghanistan, which the Taliban, before the US had invaded, had almost completely shut off. During the 20 years of US occupation of Afghanistan, opium production increased. Now that the US have been kicked out and the Taliban are back in control, opium production has again virtually completely stopped in Afghanistan. And we can go back to examples like specifically concerning South America, like the Iran-Contra affair. It's clear every accusation is an admission of guilt from the imperialists. And it's clear what these provocations are because not just because they want the Venezuelan resources, vast resources of oil, perhaps one of the most productive untapped oil fields in the world, but also vast amounts of mineral wealth, which the US desperately needs. And the US is pivoting away from Europe. That's been clearly the policy set out by the Trump administration and the bourgeoisie of the United States, with no prospect of success in Ukraine. They've ditched that project while making out with the deals with the Ukrainian government and footing Europe with the bill for that horrible and terrible conflict that the NATO imperialists have instigated. The US and Trump came to Europe and said, you must spend 5% of your GDP on your armies or military-related industries. There's a simple reason for that. The US no longer has the strength, no longer has the capacity to project its power across everywhere in the world. So the US is looking to pivot away from Europe, leave that to Europeans now that they've sabotaged the economies of Germany and stiffed them with Ukraine. Pivoting away from that, and they're looking towards Latin America and China specifically as their principal targets. And it's the failing US imperialism. As we go into, I think today is the first day of the government shutdown where they're unable to agree on a budget, and their courts have recently ruled that Americans must continue receiving SNAP, which is their version of the Venezuelan CLAP, which is the food aid which goes to some 40 million Americans, about half of which are children, and who the government, the Trump administration, were perfectly willing to see going without food. So essentially they were going to let 40 million people maybe not starve, but they would certainly fall into malnourishment, and certainly some of them would start having extreme struggles, and some of them would die without that food assistance. So in the context of wanting to invade Venezuela, whose crimes are wanting to use its own wealth and its own labour to provide better living standards for its own people, in that context, they're willing to go to war with Venezuela while letting over 40 million of their population go without food. That's the context of the imperialist aggression on Venezuela. So as their economy falters, as they're less able to extract wealth from other countries, as countries like Venezuela, like the Sahel states, like many others stand up against American imperialism and British imperialism, all NATO-aligned imperialist countries, their economies are struggling, they're starting to falter, and they're starting to cannibalise populations at home. That's why they're so desperate. On top of that, Venezuela provides a bad example because they are struggling towards socialism. They've said they're anti-imperialist, they've said they're socialist, they're working towards it. They're giving more power to the people. That's what frightens them so much about this communal constitution, the development of the communes, the arming of the militias, the arming of the people. Because they could overthrow a military and a government. They've done it in Libya. They did it in Syria. They've done it in many, many countries. It's been the playbook for decades, especially since the wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, with significant amounts of imperialist boots on the ground, were so unpopular, precisely because those people were willing and motivated to defend their homelands, and did defend their homelands. But in Libya and Syria and Iraq, and Afghanistan, they're not able to fight wars like that anymore. They can no longer project that kind of power with their material forces, with their military equipment, with the numbers of people that are willing to enlist in the military to go and die in other countries for the benefit of their own ruling class. They're simply not able to do it. So there's no hope of them without being able to overthrow a small government, a small military, a small comprador class, bribe a group of officers, bribe sections of the government to overthrow the patriotic, sovereign, national liberation forces from Venezuela. They're not able to overthrow the entire Venezuelan people, and that's what scares them so much about the people being armed, about the people being in control of their destiny, people deciding what happens in Venezuela. And that's why it's so important for us to understand this as well as part of a global, united struggle against imperialism, for two reasons. One, we know there has been no successful national liberation movement that has not turned towards socialism, towards Marxism-Leninism for inspiration for its ideas. Think about all the national liberation struggles that have been inspired by the DPRK, a truly mind-boggling struggle against UN imperialism, because it was under the flag of the UN that the Americans, British and other nations were fighting against the Korean and Chinese peoples as they sought to defend the DPRK from imperialist aggression. That was under a UN flag, and they flattened that country. In Pyongyang, there were 2 buildings left standing. In certain places on the front line, there was nothing left standing. It was barren, burnt rock, and they could only come out at night to resupply and build their defences and fight again the next day. But those people won through the determination of securing a true liberty, of true national sovereignty, based on communism, based on involving the entire working class of that nation, not a small section of their bourgeoisie, not a small section of a comprador privileged class, but of engaging and mobilising the mass of workers to achieve real liberty from the imperialists and the national comprador bourgeoisie as well. So we have to understand the Venezuelan struggle as part of our struggle for liberation in Britain, as part of the struggle for British workers to overthrow British imperialism, which doesn't just oppress those abroad by, for example, holding their gold to ransom, overthrowing their governments, covert espionage, and the worst imperialist propaganda broadcast around the world, but it oppresses the British people as well. Through that exploitation, it goes hand in hand. It's the reason the British government want to give $2 billion to an Israeli company to train British soldiers. Because those genocidal maniacs are the best people for oppressing an unarmed population, for committing horrible acts against defenceless people, innocent people, women, children, etc. Those are the people that the British government want to come and train our soldiers. Why? Because they want our soldiers to be able to oppress the British working class if we start saying too loudly, too forcefully, enough is enough, and we start moving and organising and doing something about it. So it's important for us to learn these lessons from Venezuela, to study what's going on in Venezuela, to have solidarity with Venezuela, and to take those lessons back here as well and share them amongst the British working class in order to build a path for our own liberation, our own liberty, and the liberty and liberation of the entire working class of the world. Thank you, comrades. Or nada! They're also very good at chanting. We need to learn. They're very active and enthusiastic.
El pueblo! And all across Latin America, actually, you see that because the movement against imperialism and for socialism in every Latin American country as a genuinely mass movement. Wherever you go to visit the people who are organised in those movements, there is this huge enthusiasm that comes from grassroots connection. You can't go to a mass event or a congress of a party without seeing these, spontaneous bursts of chanting and massive enthusiasm. And that's something that's really useful for our people to experience as well, that this is a genuinely mass movement. The movement for socialism is the direction of travel for humanity. And in large parts of the world, it has deep roots amongst the masses, engages their enthusiasm and participation precisely because it represents a future. People believe in their future and they're ready to fight for it. And that's what it looks like. That's why people jump around chanting and waving their flags and, you can't shut them up, right? And you can't go to a Latin American political meeting and sit politely the way we sit here for 3 hours. It's the same in Africa. I've been in Kenya. I was at the Kenyan Communist Party Congress last year, and the number of times, or this year, like during the proceedings, people would suddenly jump up and someone would start a chant and then someone else, and then it would turn into a song, and then it would turn into a little parade around the hall, and then they'd all sit down and carry on again. And, it's a reflection of genuine positive engagement by masses of people. It reflects their local culture, but it also reflects their sense of hope, of optimism, of engagement. It's really important that we understand that. When you've seen that, you realise. When you've seen that, you realise that it's not some pipe dream connecting Marxism with the masses. It is a necessary step in order to bring it to life.
Arise like dormice from your slumber.
That is I'm going to save it for the end, actually, in my little story.
I forgot to talk about Machado.
Maybe we'll come to it in the questions.
We'll have forgotten about it by next year.
In a year's time or 2 years' time, we'll be saying who, like we're saying it today about Juan Guaido, right? I just wanted to add a couple of things that came up for me while I was listening to that, and then I'm going to open, so you all have a think what your questions or contributions are. I'm sure you have them. One thing I wanted to mention from my experience, I saw a big shift in the situation and the people's mentality in between two of my visits to Venezuela, which were, one was January, so I was there in 2019, and then I was there in 2020, January 2020, just before all the lockdowns started. And then the next time I was there was 2023. So they'd been through the pandemic and out the other side. In 2019 and 2020, what I saw was that the sanctions regime was really at its peak, that the people were braced, that they were pushing through and holding it together, but it was really, really hard. And you felt like the whole revolution was held together with just pure determination. You couldn't see quite how else they were doing it somehow. And there were power cuts every day. And there was like only 1 in 4 light bulbs in any hotel you went into was actually on, and only 1 in 4 lifts was working. And, because spare parts were missing. It wasn't just electricity. They couldn't get parts to repair things, and that has a cumulative effect on a country and an economy. And the people were grimly determined, I would say. I would characterize the mood in 2020 when I was there. In 2023, what was interesting to me, there had been a shift in terms of, I felt like there were more working parts, around the place, and there was a kind of steady shift. It was obviously still really difficult, but there was a shift in the mood. And the sense of the people was very much, we have endured everything they could throw at us, and not only are we still here, but things are improving. And not only are things improving, but the multipolar world is rising, and it's like the cavalry's just over the hill. And you could like, even though all of the changes people want and need hadn't happened yet, they had this sense of, we're going to get there. It was a really big shift. And, bear in mind that in those 3 years, half of that was pandemic time, when the screws were tightened even harder on top of what was already a massive crisis situation. The imperialists did everything they could to use the pandemic to make the people scream. They really, really tried to make them suffer as much as possible. And yet when I went in 2023, the mood had moved from grim determination to optimism, even though they still had so many problems they were facing. That was really interesting to me, and that's what I consistently see with reports back and my connections with Venezuela and everything that I see what's happening is that shift is very real. And one thing that happened that really changed the consumer situation in terms of availability of goods. So obviously they've done this big shift in terms of food production, but that doesn't change like toothpaste and soap and just day-to-day stuff that you need. A really big thing that happened was a big deal between Venezuela and Iran. And they started to help one another with energy, and Iran started to help Venezuela with consumer goods. And now in Caracas and around Venezuela, there are loads of, I guess you call them supermarkets, small type, not hypermarkets, Iranian supermarkets with consumer goods that make people's lives better, right? It's a really important development. And this is an example of how the hyper-sanctioned countries are coming to one another's aid. Yeah. And the sanctions, which in the early days were so effective, have become a blunt tool now because of the fact that they've targeted so many countries with massive sanctions, including China. They've actually created a huge part of the world now that's got a massive motivation to work together to bypass the imperialist system. And the imperialists well and truly lifted a rock and dropped it on their own feet. So I think that's something that's really significant to understand about what's changed. And again, another rock on your own feet situation, I believe, is this narco-terrorism propaganda. Because this is not 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It was back in the 80s, wasn't it? And the 90s, the US were leaning heavily into this war on drugs story. And most people had no connection to facts on the ground to understand what was the real dynamics at play. And the fact that actually the big drug pushers are the Americans and the cartels all ultimately work for them, and they're the excuse for sending their armies into countries that they want to keep control over. Most of us didn't have access to that information. It was very hard to understand the dynamics that were going on. But because of all of the unsuccessful wars the USA has been waging that have led to splits in the ruling class and leaks from important sources, there has been a steady shift in terms of the faith that people have in the narrative that comes from the ruling class, and a steady build-up of evidence that where we now have a situation where not only we don't trust our rulers, our politicians and our media, but we also have easy access to a whole load of information that just simply wasn't out there before. And the combination of all of that means when Donald Trump now comes out and starts yelling about narco-terrorists, the first thing a lot of people do is say, oh, does that mean when they talked about the war on drugs before, that was all bullshit as well? And actually what they're doing is reminding people to look back and start joining up the dots in a way nobody was really able to do 30 years ago. And now there are many more people who are aware that the reason the imperialists are the major drug runners, apart from the fact that there's just loads of money to be made out of it. I mean, we go all the way back, don't we, to the British and the opium trade and how they monopolized that and how they forced drugs onto populations in India and China to dominate them, but also because there's so much money to be made from it. But what we've seen in the modern world, especially in the post-World War II world, where the imperialists have to sort of, a lot of their nefarious activities, they need to pretend they're not doing them. So they need ways to have enough money to pay for enough mercenaries that never go through the official budget. And they found that the drugs trade is the perfect way to do it. So they're the ultimate crime lords, the ultimate drugs lords, the ultimate weapons arms runners, gun runners, they're the ones who are running all of that, all of these black markets around the world, in order to be able to carry out operations that they then pretend were nothing to do with them. But this knowledge is now becoming much more common. And Donald Trump has actually pointed a big finger at this information by standing there yelling about how President Maduro is this narco lord. Like, if that's true, why is this the first we heard of it? Like, it's not very credible, is it? I mean, there'll always be people who get wrapped up in wanting to believe the latest bit of propaganda hype, but increasingly people are cynical, and I think it's another way in which, in fact, the imperialists are lifting up a rock and dropping it on their own feet. They're revealing their own motivations, their own nefarious activities, and helping us do our job of enlightening people as to why this entire system cannot be reformed and really has to go. So open now. Thank you so much to our speakers, and really interesting, insightful presentations, lots of really valuable information about what's happening in Venezuela that totally contradicts the Western imperialist media narrative. Open to you guys for questions or contributions. Us? Then
Could you
Tim.
mind coming to there and just speak? Can we go? I'll give them the microphone.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating visit that you guys have had, and it's great that you've been able to bring that and share that with all of us. You spoke about the communes. This is really important, I feel, and if we want to share that knowledge with people here, how would we go about doing that so that people here would understand that ordinary people are the masters of their own destiny? How could we use that experience of the Venezuelans? And he gave the wonderful example of just a 3-year time frame, Joti, through which they've had COVID, been able to withstand that. They've been able to withstand the sanctions. And then out of that, they've got even deeper into their understanding of resisting imperialism. How do we tell that to the people here in the UK to say, look what's happened, without them falling into more retrenchment into right-wing populism is what we're seeing in the UK? How do we help people here understand what's happening in Venezuela so that they can then, the veil can be lifted? That's my question.
Good question.
That's an easy question. Come on.
That's a good question, and I'm going to get our speakers to come back to it. Tim, if you make a note. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think you've made a good point there about America being the narcotics runners. I mean, these hypocrites are always quick to condemn, right? Most of the time wrongfully, others of dealing in narcotics. I mean, it was the Americans, through the distribution of drugs that had used that revenue to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. These were the same fascists that had basically razed entire villages to the ground, looted these villages, slaughtered the inhabitants. And Ronald Reagan had called the Contras freedom fighters. Of course, what he really meant was freedom fighters from communism. But in Colombia, President Uribe, he was the older president, was a comprador of U.S. imperialism, and the CIA and Uribe must have known, that the right-wing paramilitary death squads were actually dealing in drugs. But they used that against the left-wing guerrilla organisations, FARC, and the smaller one, the ELN, to accuse them of being narcotics traffickers. Of course, what FARC was doing was they understood that that drugs were the subsistence crop of the peasants, that the peasants had no other means at that point, having a means of subsistence. But FARC had set out to use social programs and education to try and wean the peasants away from this destructive, means of raising a means of subsistence for themselves. But this is the nature of US imperialism, how its propaganda has always been aimed at those that won't bend the knee to it. And of course, they see that as their sphere of influence. They would like revolution throughout the entire hemisphere counter-revolution throughout the entire hemisphere if they could. But that is their particular sphere of influence, and they are fearful of the spread of it in what they consider to be their closest sphere of influence. Fidel Castro said something quite interesting in his address to the Tricontinental Alliance, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. He posed a question and answered it in the same vein. What do the US imperialists fear? They fear that the people, the oppressed people, will seize the guns from their oppressors and will rise up and declare themselves free people of the Americas. This is the fear of the US. Now, the Venezuelan ambassador had said at one point that, that Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba are all inextricably bound up in, America's project for regime change. And that's what they want in all these countries, is regime change. And that Nicaragua and Venezuela is in the crosshairs of US imperialism, because their greatest fear, I think is Cuba. Just to ask a question, before I finish. In the USSR, the communes, were a stage higher than the Artel system. The Artel system was at the lower stage, where not all the means of production were seized, but the peasants were allowed to hold on to their small means of production, and all the other means of production would be taken on by the state. In the communes, I think it was about seizing all the means of production, and that would be used in common. In Venezuela, I think you said something about arming the people. Are these like what these Soviets were in Russia? Because the Soviets in Russia were revolutionary organs of power. But I'll sort of leave it on that question. I don't have anything else to sort of contribute. Thank you.
Comrades, wow, we just need to go slower, because there's just so much evidence. There's so much. Thank you, comrades. Thank you. It was just so much. And where do we start? But comrades, let's start with Proletarian. Proletarian and Alba. And Alba, you've touched on it. And obviously comrades have referenced it. The bringing together of Latin America and the Caribbean in the defense of Venezuela, Cuba, all the nations of Alba. So maybe you could just say something around the foreign policy side of matters from Proletarian. And then secondly, also, you've touched on the people's militia. You've talked about the people's militia and the preparedness to defend the revolution with arms and ideology. And you made a reference to the video above. I can't see where the video is. Is it on the video? But the video above, and I see these wonderful pictures. But actually, from what you've described, is the nation is ready and willing, and actually they're waiting. You try, you dare come, you You dare. Come on then, Trump. You come, you stand right in the front, and let's see how far you get. So I think I'd like you just embed that a little bit further. It's fantastic you've done that in the contributions. But in terms of, there's just so much. So I'll just ask questions, if I may. Just 3 or 4 questions. The oil companies themselves. We're studying imperialism at the moment. I'd like to know a little bit about, maybe take it into the study circle, in terms of actually let's have a look at this oil company or the oil companies and their connections inside Venezuela, and what they're up to, and what mischief they're up to, and their connections right back to London, right back to Europe, right back to USA. So the oil companies is interesting because they are counter-revolution themselves, in terms of all their plans. Thank you for the communes. It's just absolutely. I mean, I visited the Soviet Union in 1989, 90. Dave Roberts took a drama group over there. We were in Moscow as things were changing. Things were changing rapidly. And we moved up to Archangel. And we were over in Archangel. And we saw communes of sorts, and the beginnings of the breakup of the strength of our great leaders' inspiration and the infrastructure that was beginning to be pulled in all sorts of directions in Archangel. But having said that, it seems as if in Venezuela they're rediscovering it, and they're going to have to go back to and study in the study circles as we are joining them each Thursday night. But in terms of the communes, I'd like to just ask about education of children. So wonderful things that we did see in Archangel were the pioneers, the young pioneers and the young children from very tiny ages ready, and they were in their local schools, in the library. They were celebrating each week, each day, each anniversary, the glorious efforts of the peoples of Archangel in defending the gains of the October Revolution and wanting to defend and fight. And the young children, the pioneers, were doing that. And obviously, comrades have been to Cuba. I haven't had the pleasure yet, but you've seen the pioneers and the young people of Cuba, and how it's essential in terms of education, from primary school to secondary school, and then obviously all the way up, through education. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about education. I'd like to hear a bit more about music. And actually, chanting and music is actually not chanting and music. It's the embodiment of revolutionary fight. And you've raised the issue about Africa. So, for comrades, we were in the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s and 90s, and we obviously experienced comrades, and music and chanting is actually a revolutionary fight. It really is. So it's more than that, and of course I'm a sing, but I can't sing. I can't sing, and we're from Punjabi, and we relied upon our drama groups to do people's drama, to propagandize. And so drama, music, and obviously my sons have been in South America, for quite a significant time. They came back, but they were alive with music and dance and expression, creativity. So in education, in terms of the commune, and religion. Now then, how strong is the Pope's influence in Venezuela? Sorry, I'm ignorant. But in South America, the influence of the religion itself, and actually the church, the influence of the church. Because obviously I'm thinking of the parallel is obviously my home is Bradford, obviously, but our home is in India, Pakwal, in the rural community of Punjab. And the role of in 1952, our region elected a communist MP, and from 52 to 60, 70, the struggle for communism inside Punjab was struggling. It was struggling. and it fell by the wayside into 1980-84 through the, interesting enough, Mossad's influence inside 1883-84, and the training of the SAS and Mossad with the Operation Blue Star. So they were there before we knew it, and so they split the whole of Punjab into devastating confusion, and then obviously we lost so many comrades so very good comrades in the 80s through imperialist mischief. So in terms of well, I've slightly got lost now, but where am I going? Religion. So the influence of religion. So religion completely, and to this day, the Palestinian Solidarity Movement would have enormous resources in terms of the Punjabi community, the Indian community. India is obviously, completely with Palestine, but also inside our communities in terms of Southall, Birmingham, Leicester, Bradford and others, it's completely divided by religion and all these cultural confusions that imperialism, Modi, nationalism, culture, caste. So all those things, I don't believe I've heard it exists in Venezuela, because there's so much propaganda that actually, so much spirit that you've managed to evade that. And even drugs, because obviously the capital of drugs in India is in the Punjab itself. The border switches so much drugs, and the Punjabi youth is just completely on all sorts of cocktails of drugs and alcohol. So I'm coming to the end. I'll just see what there goes. BRICS. Say a little bit more about BRICS, because actually the Chinese, so tell us a little bit more about BRICS and actually how Venezuela makes sense of that. And clearly, obviously, it's an imperialist agenda to completely, but actually, from what I understand, actually, the economics of BRICS and the wider picture in terms of the world anti-imperialist movement, we'll go from strength to strength. So Alba, chanting, BRICS, drama, religion, oil, China. But anyway, I think, and then thanks for Proletarian. But actually, you're going to have to write all this up in the next one.
Oh, mine's a simple question. I was looking at that wonderful statement there, that creating democracy, and you comrades already mentioned how efforts have been made to empower the Venezuelan people from bottom up, involve them in democracy. And then the next part is the necessary suppression of the exploiters. That's my question, that if there is a bourgeoisie there, beside the effort of the government, if there is a bourgeoisie, it's so much necessary to suppress that bourgeoisie, get rid of that bourgeoisie, and bring about a state where you do get get rid of the exploited minority and the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the immediate task facing the Venezuelan people. How can they move from this state to the next one, as you mentioned, not reforms, but how can that be accomplished so that can be put into practice?
Thank you, Sylvinda. That is a very good question. And in fact...
Too easy to answer.
Yeah, I am going to quickly interject there before I bring Nina in on this question, because it's quite an important one. You're free, anybody in the audience, to disagree with me if you want, that's fine. My view of what we're seeing in Venezuela is it's a dual power situation. And it's quite a slow motion revolution, essentially. Rather than the kind of direct and rapid conquest of political power by the proletariat, what we're seeing is a slow and steady building of proletarian institutions alongside bourgeois ones, and a slow shifting, as the proletarian ones get stronger, a slow shifting of the center of power. What you're also noticing is, rather than having suppressed the bourgeoisie in one go immediately, what you've had is, again, a very slow process whereby each time the bourgeoisie launches an offensive, a little bit of it gets cut off as in response. So some factories that are used to try to sabotage the economy, they get nationalized. Some people are funded to create a fascist opposition on the streets. They are in prison or in exile. And it's like this. It's a slow drip, dual power shifting. It's not the classic. You can't kind of map it onto your picture of the October Revolution and say this is this, and this is this, and they've done it according to Lenin's plan. But you can see that we've basically got a dual power situation. And for some time, I would say through the period of the really intense sanctions that I talked about, when things were really tough, you had a kind of total stalemate where neither force was strong enough to move against the other, and they were just both sides were kind of hunkering down and waiting for a chance to, push further. I think what we're seeing now is there's been a real shift, that there's now more, the balance of forces is shifting. And because that also reflects an international as well as within the country balance of forces is shifting in favour of the revolutionary forces and the proletarian state. You see this new communal constitution, that's another shift. That's another step forward in terms of strengthening the proletarian side. I think that the present attempt at regime change that's being launched by the USA is going to see a furthering of the attack against the forces of the bourgeoisie inside Venezuela, because they'll expose themselves and there'll be a need to close them down. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the corporate media, the imperialist-backed media, finds itself firmly in the crosshairs. The Bolivarian regime has been, in my view, insanely lenient towards, totally liberal, towards bourgeois media. They've set up their parallel media, but they've allowed the enemy media essentially to carry on running, and it creates huge problems for them. But if they find themselves in a war situation with hostile media in their midst, they'll have every reason to come for the media. So, I look at it in that way. It's very much a slow, step-by-step process, but you can see the balance of forces is shifting, and you can see the determination coming from the grassroots as well as from the government. It's a kind of, they work in tandem. So that's the way that I would see that. We don't yet have the dictatorship of the proletariat in Venezuela. We have basically dual power. But it's steadily shifting in that direction, I would say. It's not over.
I think every time we have a presentation of this type, of why we show solidarity, I get the feeling that we are learning to apply theory in practice in a dialectical way, and to see these processes that you said, they're not over, to see them develop, and the stages that we as Marxist-Leninists are able, using the Marx-Lenin science, to detect. And to see that there is no copy-paste, there's no copyright, and to respect that each country is going to have maybe sometimes a popular democratic revolution moving into socialism in stages. But our role as communists in the West are not to criticize, are not to say you're not following the steps by the book, and therefore we cannot support you. It's exactly the opposite, is to support the people, support the popular forces, in order to also inspire our own popular forces here. And I'm very glad the link that Dan made is excellent. That's why we support the Bolivarian revolution in all its stages, and especially right now. I love the way Joti explained it. It's almost like the revolution, the Bolivarian revolution is sending antibodies where they are most needed. Of course, we hope that there weren't wounds on the body of the revolution, but they are sometimes. And this is where we see the resilient. And they want to strengthen the people, and they're strengthening the people, and the people now are in the stage where they won't be suppressed. My question to Eleonore would, because I know she met a lot of women there, and she participated in an initiative of anti-imperialist women, and especially women in Venezuela, the role of the women in those socialist revolutions, or processes of revolution, because as we have the quotation of Lenin behind you, there can be no socialist revolution unless very many working women take a big part in it. And so my question is, you explained it in a way, you very vividly described what's happening in the communes with the families, the children, and of course women are part of it. Part of cooking, part of serving, part of, you know, these are the people who are supporting the revolution. And you have in this person, this fascistic pin-up girl that they picked, Machado. Yeah, well, you have the exact opposite of this kind of women that we see in Venezuela. In that one is an individualistic, comprador, fascistic kind of, you know, kind of symbol.
But she's got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Of course. As a proxy for Trump getting the Nobel Prize. And then you have all these women who are part of the communal life. And they make sure that the children are raised with a future and a hope in the future. So I think that they will fail in ever creating fascistization in Venezuela. It's impossible. And that for us is a very, very hopeful sign. They have failed to do that. And so, you know, based on your description, I think we are, as a party, we are leading the way in these reasons why we show solidarity with Venezuela. It's not because we are Spanish-speaking, it's because we're internationalists, proletarian internationalists, and we have the tools to see why these people affect our own struggle here. So thank you very much. And we can take hope and we can also share in this future and joy of having a future. And we can also say, Viva Venezuela, and mean it, yes? Viva, Viva Venezuela.
All right, well, I'm going to ask Dan and then Ellie to respond to whichever ones worked for them. And then we'll wrap up.
I mean, it's difficult when talking about this. There's obviously so much that has come out of it. And I'm glad to see that it's really sparked a lot of interest and enthusiasm from comrades because it is a real living revolutionary process with difficulties, but with optimism as well. Like the question of the state and the process of the revolution is a key one. Like Joti says, they're building a dual power situation where they've been within the confines of a bourgeois state that they've been trying to pummel aspects of it into submission. They've been beating the constitution, they've been crushing ministries, they've been transforming it piece by piece as best they can to try and give more and more power to the people. And actually, if you go there, the ministries say ministries of people's power or popular power on them. They're not just ministries, they're ministries of the people's power, which is really lovely to see. And they let communists come in and have meetings there. And it really is it's an interesting, they're still struggling with a lot of these questions, theoretically and practically, which is, you know, the major issue at the moment where their theory, where they have theory or lack of theory, where they lack theory is meeting reality. And the reality is that there is a state. It's a bourgeois state that, like I say, has been, you know, co-opted as much as possible by the PSUV and these socialist forces. They have this state to enable and try and engender workers' power within the country and all these social programs and try and give the workers more power to enable them to take control of their lives. But there's also things that the state needs to do, such as national defence and relations with other countries. So there's kind of tendrils coming from the bottom down and the top up, and you know where they meet, the people are going to have to start taking over more of the state, crushing the bourgeois elements of the state, and driving out the comprador, certainly the comprador bourgeois elements. And it really is principally a revolution of national liberation, of anti-imperialism first. That's how it started, of sovereignty, of dignity, of wanting to use the resources of Venezuela, the labour of Venezuelans, for the benefit of the country. Like it's got the biggest, most profitable oil reserves in the world, right? Look at how they treat Saudi Arabia, a tiny country of backwards terrorists. And they treat them with every grace and care in the world simply because they follow the directions of the imperialism. And they're one of the wealthiest nations in the world. They can import slave labour from across the world and do what they like. But they're so progressive, they started letting women drive a few years ago, as long as they're in the presence of a suitable male companion. It's absolutely ridiculous. The crime of the Venezuelans has been to try and have a national liberation movement, to use their own resources and power. And that's why they're having to look towards socialism to do that, because you can't do it any other way. You can't do it while integrated with the imperialist system, with the imperialist economy, because they will crush that every way they can, as they have been learning step by step, as it brings more people into this process, as it brings more people into this understanding. There is an issue in Venezuela with culture and education and reading and theory that needs to be transformed. But there's always that lovely quote from Marx that theory becomes a material force as soon as it grips the masses, and it's starting to grip the masses, and people are looking to learn and educate themselves more and more on like what's happening, how can we change it, how can we make sure what we've gained continues to be successful. But we can't imagine that all 33 million Venezuelans are hardened communists steeled in Marxism-Leninism and marching on their way to socialism. There's still big struggles within the country regarding that. The question of religious influence was particularly an interesting one. There is a big issue with religious influence. It's the influence of American evangelicists, whatever they're called. The evangelical American churches have been pushed into Venezuela over the past few years. It's another question of like, why don't you ban them? But while we were there, proceedings were delayed by a couple of days because there were 2 days of national celebration to celebrate the canonization of 2 Venezuelan saints, which is a big thing. It's a primarily Catholic country, and they didn't have any saints before. It's an unusual thing for a Catholic country to not have any saints. And one is a woman.
Equal opportunities.
So, despite the Pope being a Yankee, I think it was the previous Pope that agreed to canonise these 2 saints, and he just had to follow through with it. But we can also see that as a counter to the influence of US evangelical religion, which is also inherently linked with Zionism and US imperialism.
One of them wasn't Chavez.
One of them wasn't Chavez. Neither of them were Chavez. One of them was a doctor who helped the poor, and I can't remember the other one, I'm sorry. But I'm not that into saints. But God bless them. The international question is very interesting. I think we probably need to arrange another party meeting on Venezuela. And, there's numerous aspects. I think it's one of the more important things for us to study all of these things, like, how, a peasant farmer in the countryside in Venezuela is linked to like the foreign policy of the entirety of, Latin America and then BRICS and everything else. But it is linked. The BRICS relationship was blocked by Lula last year. And then that's part of a problem of the pink tide, the social democratic wave over Latin America, which, so many famous examples, Allende and many others, Rafael Correa overturned in Ecuador, this constant seesawing between the people wanting something a bit better and voting a social democrat into office, and then that being overturned a few years later, whether by elections or a coup. And that's really the influence of the United States, as well as comprador bourgeoisie in Latin America. And again, that relates to the struggle within Venezuela. There is a national bourgeoisie that is supportive of the National Liberation Movement. You know, they're not threatening to expropriate them yet, and they're supportive of it. Henry Capriles, who ran against Maduro twice, was it Chavez once, Maduro once? Either way, he ran for president twice, part of the Venezuelan opposition. He is very much against US intervention, is actually in talks again with the government for a reconciliation process to bring his supporters behind defence of Venezuela. Now again, whether that's a fifth column, whether that's a threat rather than an actual friend, that's for the Venezuelans to figure out and decide. But it's, you know, in contrast to Maria Machado, who, not only won the Nobel Peace Prize, which was clearly an imperialist-directed event, she, a week after winning that, she's not only a fan of Israel, she's not only a Zionist, right? She's specifically a fan of Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu. She phoned Benjamin Netanyahu the week after she won the Nobel Peace Prize to congratulate him for his achievements in war. You couldn't make it up.
In genocide. Amazing.
And, you know, she's the one calling for US military intervention into Venezuela. What a peaceful, peace-loving person. But it's a big problem, this pink tide, social democracy, all these kind of reformist, Trotskyite tendencies within Latin America that disarm people, that disarm whole nations. Like I said, Lula, you know, a darling of like social democrats, you know, has turned out to be a complete counter-revolutionary bastard. As I was saying, Petro before was against Venezuela and Maduro until the US started turning their attention against him as an enemy of US imperialism. So all these things are interrelated, and it was just yesterday that Venezuela was put out a request for military assistance from Russia, China, and Iran. So even though they may not be formally joining BRICS at the moment, those links are very much there. They're definitely getting support and assistance in various ways from those countries, economically and militarily. Most of the military hardware in Venezuela is Russian. They have S-300s, they have Buck M2s, they have Igla S, all for short, medium and long range air defence. You know, there are strong international links there. And as well as the internationalism you see on the ground, like we were saying when we go around the communes, all of the active communards had a strong sense of international solidarity. But there was a good point made by one of the people that contributed to the platform events, the conference over the week, that, you know, communes aren't inherently revolutionary, they aren't inherently socialist. They're just one way of organising production. Now, the communes in Venezuela are definitely, a lot of them, explicitly socialist, explicitly communist, some of them explicitly Marxist-Leninist. You know, and through their experience and development, they are becoming more socialist, more progressive. But they're still figuring out how to organise them, how to join them up. So, at the moment, the communes are slightly disjointed, they're slightly uncoordinated between each other. They're building informal, semi-informal links, but there's no state coordination, partially because the state is semi-unreliable, as it's still a bourgeois state. So there's no higher level of coordination between the different communes. And potentially that's something that is going to develop over the next few years, a bigger coordination between the communes, and potentially then looking at a rival to the actual state, when the actual people have power through the communes and the state becomes more and more sidelined, less and less relevant. And that's what the imperialists and the counter-revolutionaries have been afraid of all these years, like since they started the Constituent National Assembly to reform the constitution, since they started all these things of these organisations of dual power. That's what they're afraid of, because that's taking real power away from the ability of them to overthrow what's currently still a bourgeois state. It's taking away real power from the bourgeoisie there. How can we share the experience of the communes with people here? I think primarily we have to We have to learn about them, to understand them. We don't want to overstate them and say, sorry. You know, we don't want to misrepresent the situation in Venezuela. We want to understand what is happening as part of the process. And hopefully this meeting has gone some way towards that. You know, there's a lot of articles in Proletarian about it. There's stuff on Proletarian TV. But we can relate it as, I think Ellie opens the meeting, as ordinary people being able to take control of their lives, being able to take control of their destinies, having their basic needs put into their own hands to enable them to achieve things that were not options for them under the bourgeois state, under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. It wasn't an option for them to educate their children, to get access to good, healthy food, affordable food, to have access to affordable, decent housing. You know, all of these basic needs have been given to the people's own hands to meet, rather than being dependent on them from social welfare programs from a bourgeois state, or just simply not having the option at all. The people are forging their own destiny. The people are able to make their own choices about how their own lives are run, and out of that as well, in the future, it will develop into how their own country is run. And so I think it's, although the whole process is complex, it's the easiest thing to explain to people is where working people have control and power over their own lives, their own destinies, and their own country.
Beautiful, thank you, Dan. Ellie.
Yes, thank you, Dan, for answering most of the question. On how to help the British people to understand the communal system and what's happening in Venezuela. We had a very interesting meeting with Tania Diaz, which is the Ministry Officer of Communication. And she gave us this idea that we should encourage us, you know, we the people who live in imperialist countries, to have a strong propaganda campaign in favor of Venezuela, and to probably designate one person in our organization, or maybe that was Dan's suggestion, one person in each organization that is dedicated to, you know, countering the lies of the bourgeoisie against Venezuela. I don't know if that would be possible in our organization, but we can aspire to that. Definitely, because it's a huge campaign. It's a huge stream of lies that we have to undone, and most of the people, again, know nothing about what's happening. Proletarian, we have our papers, but they're not mass papers yet. So there will be definitely, and we also can organize meeting like this one, and we have one coming up very soon on the 15th of November in Bolivar Hall, if you don't mind showing the... which is Viva Venezuela, Stand Against Fascism, Imperialism and War, and Dan and myself will be talking at that event. And Joti, sorry, all of us. How can I forget Joti? Sorry. Probably. So it will be from 1 p.m. to still 6 p.m. So I hope to see most of you there, and it will be a very broad, you know, event. So more people will have a chance to hear about Venezuela that are not necessarily in contact with us. So that's very positive. Maybe we should also write a pamphlet on Venezuela or Latin America in general, because that's something that people ask on stalls. Do you have something on Venezuela? You should have something on Venezuela. And you're like, no, but we have something on socialism. We have many, many things on socialism, if you're interested. But to have something specifically on what's happening in Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, which are the three mostly targeted country, targeted by imperialism, will be, I think, a good way for accessing people and giving them the information about what's happening there. And the question about the involvement of women, we had a lot of interesting speeches at the anti-imperialist platform and at the launch of the Women the women platform as well, where there is a lot of women involved in the Bolivarian process. It's a very empowering and emancipatory process for women. They're involved in every strata of society, at the communal level, at the community level, in the assembly. I don't know how many of them are in the assembly, but they are present, and they are writing laws for the violence done against women, violence done against teenage. They're trying to slow down the rate of teenage pregnancy, because it's very common in Venezuela, unfortunately, so they're trying to have a campaign against that. We had I forgot her name because my notes are a bit messy, but we had a speaker that did a really good presentation about how those laws are trying to empowering the power element of society, because they are the ones that are affected by early pregnancy, and they have and then they can't go to school anymore, they can't go to university. So now with the communal system, they have a communal way of looking after the children. They have school inside of the commune, so those women are not forced to be taken away to look after the children. They can still, pursue education and career and do something with themselves, even if they have children at a very early age. And every woman that also speaks about the fact that the women are working side by side with the men for their emancipation. It's not more than men in some case. It's the Bolivarian revolution is a feminist revolution. That was the key, one of the talk point of many of the speakers. So they work side by side with the men. They don't work against them. They've been empowered now by the Venezuelan the Bolivarian revolution, and the points that imperialism and capitalism are the one that are, suppressing women, really, because of the alienation that it creates and poverty that it creates. And so now that the Venezuelan society is working toward more and more socialism, women are becoming freer and freer to define their own destiny, and they're very happy to serve their country. They're very happy to raise children that will serve their country. And a lot of ministry officers were also women, the one that we met. So it was it's a very egalitarian society, really, in many aspects, and what we were told and what we saw as well. So yeah, I hope that's answered.
Thank you, darling. So I'm going to make a couple of closing remarks and wrap it up. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
Can I just ask a question?
No. Talk to us later. There have been a lot of questions. I just wanted to come back on this question that Dan raised about the pink tide, the social democratic kind of tide across Latin America, and that, that had both positive and negative aspects to it that we all recognise. But I think we have to also recognise that the reason that the revolutionary and the mass popular anti-imperialist movements in Latin America retreated from guerrilla struggle to parliamentary struggle was because of the fall of the Soviet Union. It was because of the shift, the massive shift in the balance of class forces at that time. And we see that it's not just in Latin America. Across the world, you see how that shift created an impetus forward for the imperialists and a step backward for liberation struggles everywhere. It was in that period that the Oslo Accords were signed in Palestine, that didn't resolve the situation. We saw that's when the Irish peace process was launched. It was a kind of stalemate, wasn't able to push forward on either side, and you have this kind of workaround. We saw that's when the anti-apartheid movement was and New South Africa was brought to an end, and New South Africa was launched, and it was a compromise, and the full liberation program was not enacted in South Africa. The land redistribution that everybody had thought they were fighting for, the charter, the Freedom Charter, wasn't implemented. They got some democratic reform, and they had in each case you saw a quite messy compromise precisely because the the global balance of forces had shifted against the oppressed for a period, for that period. And the pink tide was in that context, that there was a retreat from, people kind of gave up on the guerrilla struggles, the armed struggles, that they hadn't quite been able to win, and then the backing for a lot of them was gone, and the demoralization that kind of spread around the world also, you know. So there's a physical question of getting arms and support, and then there's the mentality, the sense of the masses that they're able to stand up, and there's the invigorated forces of reaction against them. So this was a very real situation. Nevertheless, as Dan said earlier, progress that was able to be made in places like Brazil, and then especially in Venezuela, was very much linked to the fact that the imperialists then got themselves bogged down in trying to regime change every government they didn't like in the Middle East. And you see the Middle East was their priority then, and it's becoming again the priority to try to stop that liberation struggle that keeps popping back up because of how important the oil is. But Hugo Chavez did say, I remember this clearly, it's very hard to find it on the internet because it was just before the days when everything was online. But I remember him saying, thanking the Iraqi resistance for the space it was providing to Latin America, that they were able to push forward. There was a whole period during Chavez's lifetime where the Venezuelan government, elected through bourgeois means, was able to spend Venezuela's money on providing for the poor. And nobody really got in their way. They were, you know, do you remember that during that period, Hugo Chavez came to London and gave oil to London buses to support Ken Livingstone's London? I mean, it was a slightly mental picture, but the point is that the Hugo Chavez's government was able to decide how to. They were getting huge oil revenues, and they were able to decide how to spend them. And they had decided that their priority was lifting up the poor, right? And the USA and the imperialist camp was bogged down in all these wars, from Afghanistan and Iraq in particular. They were so bogged down there that they didn't have the attention to turn to what was happening in Latin America, and it created this space. So you see how these things are all connected. The anti-imperialist struggle is not separate. We all fight against our particular state, but we also have to recognize the interconnectedness of these whole struggles, and it's important, I think, to recognize that, and to see now, when you look now at the conditions in Venezuela, a big part of the picture is how the global balance of forces are shifting once again very much in favor of the masses, and what that means for their prospects and their mentality. You see that they feel we are not alone. For a long time they were holding out and they felt isolated. Now they don't feel isolated. They feel that they're part of the global majority, and they're part of a world that's rising and strengthening, and they see it strengthening all around them. And that then has its own virtuous circle, if you like, in terms of how people feel, how determined they are, how ready they are to sacrifice. They don't feel like they're on a doomed ship going down. They feel like they're on a rising tide. There was a point brought up about Colombian death squads, and I just wanted to draw the parallel that the imperialists use these death squads everywhere. And you talked about, Tim, how they were drug running. Didn't we see exactly the... And you see the same thing all over the world, but I just wanted to bring it home to Britain and Ireland. Didn't we see exactly the same in the north of Ireland? Weren't the loyalist forces, weren't the UVF, UDA, all of those paramilitary death squads who were also drug runners? Isn't that basically the imperialist modus operandi? And their job is to terrorize a working class community that's trying to get free. In Colombia, we saw those death squads assassinating, for example, people who tried to make a trade union in a Coca-Cola factory would immediately get assassinated by Colombian death squads who were basically controlled ultimately by the USA. Didn't we see the same thing in the north of Ireland, that these paramilitaries were used to carry out basically state-backed targeted assassinations of Republican leaders and activists, sometimes at quite low-level activists. It's just a terror campaign, and the state stands behind and says, oh, nothing to do with us. But we've learned now, haven't we, whenever these forces are around, that their ultimate backers are the state. It's a level of arm's length. And Labour governments are equally in favour of using these forces as Tory ones. It makes no difference. So that's something that we need to learn from. That the phenomenon of the fascistic drug-running paramilitary death squad is not unique to Latin America. It's not got something to do with the Latin American character. This is how imperialism operates when it wants to keep down a rising working class. So this question of how do we help the British workers understand the truth about Venezuela, Ellie did a good job of answering that. I'm going to say it again. We are part of a broad meeting, a bigger meeting than this, with more speakers and more information, that's going to be held in 2 weeks' time in Bolivar Hall, which is central London. Bolivar Hall, as most of you know, is the meeting room that is owned by the Venezuelan embassy. So it's a broad initiative. It's not just our party's initiative. We are just amongst the supporters and speakers there. And that's in 2 weeks' time at 1 p.m. in Bolivar Hall. I think we need to just realise that we have actually produced a lot of material on Venezuela, and we will continue to do so. How do we help British workers understand what's happening? Share it. Do everything possible. Like, okay, Proletarian doesn't have a mass readership. How's it going to get one? It's going to get one by everybody we know making more efforts to get it out in front of people. And the same with our videos, the same with our websites. You know, there's huge resources there. It's not going to be that hard for us to put together our pamphlet on Venezuela. It's just a question of deciding, out of all the materials we've got, what goes into it to make it, coherent and interesting. But we have lots and lots of material. If people want to find it, it's all there. It's just we need to grow our forces. Really, the answer to all of our questions is always we've got to grow our forces so that we have more channels to connect the information analysis we have with a broader section of the working class. And I think I just wanted to come back to the point that Nina made. It's so important for us to realise that on any particular struggle that we highlight, it's not a question of charity, sympathy, pity, or even empathy. We are internationalists, not as a kind of label or a kind of club. We are internationalists because we understand it's the only way to beat imperialism. Beating imperialism is the number one priority of humanity. The number one priority of humanity is to destroy the imperialist system. We understand that because we are scientific socialists. And therefore, we must join our struggles. We can't let the Venezuelan people be battered by our own ruling class, let them enrich themselves on Venezuelan wealth, and then be surprised that it's really hard to beat our own ruling class because they've got all this power and money, and they can use it to exert more control over us at home. How do we weaken our own ruling class? We help every struggle against them to victory. It sounds like a funny thing to say when you're a small organisation. We've got to beat imperialism. We've got to help these big forces who are fighting our enemy to victory. But nevertheless, that is what we have to do. And being small is no excuse, doesn't excuse you from trying. It just puts more impetus on you, more duty on you to grow. We have to grow. We have to help humanity fulfill what we know is its duty, is its requirement for progressing out of this death spiral that this system puts us into. There is a way out. We've seen it. That's why we celebrate the October Revolution, not because we're into historical reenactment, because we understand the Stop it. We understand where society needs to get to. We understand what our role is. And I need to just share with you one last story as I wrap up. Some of you have heard it before, but it really embodies so much of what we've been talking about today. I was in a meeting in a commune in Venezuela a few years ago, and before they took us around, they had a little meeting to welcome us. And the lady who was running the meeting was a working class grandmother. She was a classic abuela of the real grassroots working class community. And she was so the boss of that community. She was this little feisty woman who clearly has brought up her kids and her grandkids and, you know, has got everybody in line. And she was speaking in Spanish, and my Spanish is terrible, but it's just about, I can kind of follow, you know, along with the sense of things. But my ears really pricked up, and I was very moved and heartened to realize that during her speech, she quoted Marx, and she quoted something that even Dan said during this meeting. She said, "Theory becomes a material force when it grips the masses." And I felt the power at that moment of our movement. I felt the power of the emancipatory effect on women. I saw this woman and the community she was part of as the embodiment of why it is that, on the one hand, socialism mobilizes women because it really offers them the chance for liberation. And on the other hand, once a mass movement has mobilized women, how unstoppable it becomes, because they are the glue that hold the grassroots community together. They're the ones who build everything at the bottom of our society. And if you've mobilized them into action, you have created a mesh that really cannot be broken. And the importance of women, I think it's very significant that the women's platform was launched in Caracas, where they have really mobilized the mass of working class women into the movement. And I have seen the effect that has on the society, on the not just on women, but on the whole of the movement, on the whole of the society. And last but not least, I think we need to end with the popular Latin American slogan, "El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido." Thank you.